Kevin, should we all be on peptides?
I think it's a good question these days. Did you read the Sherwood article I linked on
I
in the
read the short
newsletter?
article. I read what you wrote in the newsletter this week.
Yeah.
Chemistry wasn't my best subject. Peptides are just like a short chain amino acids, like a little bit less than a protein memory.
As I'm starting to understand, yes, I think that is generally speaking right. And there's a lot of them. Like insulin is a peptide, semaglutide, the active ingredient in your favorite GLP-1, also peptides. So like there are many peptides out there. Do you take any peptides, Martin?
I put some collagen peptides in my evening tea because it's supposed to help with my skin, hair, and muscle recovery.
There you go.
That is regulated as a supplement
Mhm.
because it is coming from, cow bones and stuff. Peptides generally are not regulated as a supplement, right? Like we have food and drugs, which are regulated by the FDA. We have supplements, which are not regulated by the FDA. And we have peptides, broadly defined, which are research chemicals.
Yeah, it's an interesting world. As I noted in the newsletter, that Sherwood article highlighted Google Trends data, which shows peptides search has exploded over the past year, more than Ozempic at the moment, it blows my mind, right? But is indicative of the times we live. I spent a good chunk of Monday listening to that debate on TBPN between Max Marchione, who runs Superpower, and the Pharma Bro, Martin Shkreli. It's a fascinating conversation, right? Like on the one hand, you've got the medical establishment saying these things aren't proven. We don't have real research on them. This is concerning. We should have a regulator who oversees this process. That regulator is called the FDA. And on the other hand, we've got citizen scientists saying a lot of people are already taking these things. This BPC 157, athletes seem to do it. They seem to recover faster. Why can't I then do it, right? And seems like we're going to enter a deregulatory period where compounding pharmacies are going to be able to get back in the game here, which is going to open up a rather large entrepreneurial opportunity for companies like Superpower or Hims, which is building out its compounding pharmacy infrastructure at the moment. We saw Tom Brady involved in a company that's raising a boatload of capital, which seems kind of purpose-built for this opportunity. We're seeing derivative plays of the infrastructure start to raise capital, which seems like a sure signal that the investor interest is there. There's an opportunity afoot, and we're going to see folks do well in the space. Also seems like we're going to see some negative consequences from this, from people taking kind of unknown substances that they are sourcing from seemingly drug dealers in China at the moment. And to me, it's kind of broadly indicative of the mistrust we have in our society with our regulators, which concerns me a little bit.
Yeah, it is concerning. It is 12:01 on March 30th, and we are now live with the Grand Roundup. Kevin and I have a packed show for you today. We're going to start off with AHIP, which happened last week, Monday through Wednesday. It was the mood was not great at AHIP, Kevin.
What is AHIP, Martin? You were there live, right?
I was there live. America's Health Insurance Plans. They have an annual conference called Medicare, Medicaid, Duals, and Commercial, or MMDC. And yeah, so it was last week. I think it's a tough time. As we've talked about, it's a tough time to be a health insurance company at the moment.
Yeah.
No one likes you, everyone hates you, and margins are bad. So that was definitely sort of casting a pall over the conference. But there was a all-star lineup of regulators there, and we got to hear a lot from CMS leadership on what was going on. One of the things that was in discussion was the ACA. And there was a lot of discussion there on the proposed marketplace rule. One of the things that has been proposed are no network plans or multi-year plans in the marketplace. They've said probably, given the timing for this year, that is, they're looking for comments on that, but it's not going to be in this year's rule because plans are already having to submit. But it is an interesting idea. I'm curious to get your thoughts on the no network plan.
I think this is going to be a fascinating piece to watch evolve over the next couple of years. We've seen some reactions on kind of both sides, pro and con. I think Paragon Institute came out with a um, we applaud the changes. We've seen some others come out concerned about, there's going to be topics like balance billing that inevitably come up, right? And are we just passing costs off on the consumer and moving in this direction? And those seem like legitimate concerns that are going to have to be answered in time. But I step back and I think to myself, okay, the regulatory energy coming out of DC, or deregulatory energy, if you will, encouraging competition. We just saw last week our second DOJ lawsuit of a health system, New York Presbyterian. First was in Ohio, around anti-tiering concepts and all or nothing concepts in network contracts. And it's like, if you are trying to go after that network contract construct and the power that large entities have over the market because of that network, it seems like a really logical thing to just rethink the network entirely. And we're seeing some really interesting models emerge. We were talking to Lantern last week about how they're rethinking the center of excellence construct, which is really a network rebuild, right? And I think it's going to be fascinating to watch what the concept of a provider network looks like over the next 3 to 5 years and how that changes over time. Like we've seen with No Surprises Act, there are shenanigans that can happen when you go from out of network to in network, and you get sideways on what's the billing rate that you should be charged. So I think that no network thing is going to be fascinating to watch how it plays out over time. I also think the multi-year plan, like people have talked about this for years now, right? If we had longer term plans, payers would be more incentivized to invest in preventative health. We'd have less costs from member churn and friction in that regard. And like, I get that. I think at some point it would make sense to have some longer term plan offering. Intellectually, I'm less interested in that than the network plan thing, though. Personally, how about you?
Yeah. I like the no network plan idea conceptually. It's one of those things I think that the execution it's an execution game. Like it
For
is a
sure.
very confusing thing for patients, but if you can architect the experience and design correctly, we've seen some, it's not quite analogous, but Surest is pretty popular from my perspective, from people I talk to, and it's kind of adjacent to this. It's saying, okay, you'll pay this if you go this, if you go to
For
this
sure.
provider. So,
Yep.
I it is interesting.
Yep. I will tie it to, I just saw a question in the chat around tools like Turquoise, transparency, whatnot. To me, tools like Turquoise should enable this future state in a really interesting way, where if all of a sudden you have seamless contracting and you understand what prices are and you can clear those prices in real time, the need for these dinosaur networks that have existed for 30, 40 years should go way, way down. And so there's an interesting dynamic at play in that market where that actually feels like the use case for these types of plays over time that gets really interesting.
I want to switch gears to Medicare Advantage. So Chris Klomp gave a rousing speech. I mean, it was like one of those things where everyone in the room was on the edge of their seats as he was giving it. He was talking about MA's rule as stewards of health insurance and of the taxpayer dollars, and we included a little finger wagging admonishing MA plans for rev cycle cleverness and gamesmanship. It sounded like what we've been hearing from the administration. Like I wouldn't say that there's any big change there, but with the impending final release, everyone's a little bit jumpy for that final rates notice.
Final notice is due by Monday, April 6th, right? That's the deadline of it. And it seems like it could come out any point between now and then.
Yeah, if I were, I think our sort of internal, if we were making bets, it'd be Friday after class.
They seem
Is
to
when,
see they seem to do that consistently at this point. It's like
yes,
Friday at 5 p.m. It's like, wow,
yes.
we're trying to ruin our weekends here.
CMMI, couple quick hits. So Abe Sutton uh, talked a little bit about prior auths not being a barrier and risk adjustment not being a strategic advantage. That's all stuff we've heard.
Yep.
Access, deflationary, that's why the rates are so low. One of the exciting things is they announced a new CMMI program called Aspire, Accelerating State Pediatric Innovation Readiness and Effectiveness. It's going to be whole person care delivery for Medicaid or CHIP patients who are at risk of developing complex medical or behavioral needs, securing a healthier future for some of America's most vulnerable youth. It's going to be 5 states. I'm pretty excited to see what 5 states that ends in. As you know, I've been following a couple Florida-based pediatric models, and it seems like, man, it would be really cool for those
Yeah.
companies to be able to do something on that. We've got just some other random stuff. So there's a lot of chatter about ways to improve alignment and ease burdens for like administrative burdens on quality measures. We have a lot of quality measures in this country. When I was talking to one of those plans, Bluebird Kids Health, they were talking about, between the private plans and Medicare and CHIP, they just have a lot of there's like a lot of stuff that they need, a lot of boxes they need to check for all of those plans. So that's certainly seems like something that would be welcome. And then
Yeah.
a lot of vocal support for small regional plans, but I'm always confused what that means. Like, what are they talking about when they talk about a small regional plan?
I don't know. And on the one hand, like when I think of a small regional plan, I think of a plan like UCare in Minnesota, which unfortunately just went under because of financial issues they had across Medicare and Medicaid. Like to me, that is the longstanding not-for-profit and local market that's trying to do right by members in their region of the world. There's also the alignment clovers of the world, which have ambitions beyond being a regional plan, but are performing seemingly really well as regional plans at the moment. Alignment, in particular, you can't beat their performance on a few 100,000 members, largely in California. Seems like a well-performing regional plan that's doing well. Now, the hardest part in this MA narrative Rubik's cube that like I can't square for myself at the moment is if on the one hand you are trying to ensure long-term stability by eroding some of the profit pools that have gotten out of hand over the past few years, and so in general profits are slimmer. And on the other hand, you want to encourage more competition in the market and support these smaller players. It seems like the scaled players are going to be the most efficient, be doing the best in that world where overall profit pools are narrowed. And maybe there's some dynamics around risk adjustment because the large players were advantaged there in particular. But in general, it strikes me that if you level the playing field, it's going to skew towards the more scaled plays. Like that is healthcare 101. Scale wins, right? And so I I am curious to see what happens over the next kind of several years as this plays out, where what it means for CMS to be supporting small regional plans. Because certainly you've heard it, I've heard, like we've heard this energy and the desire to support that competition. I don't yet know what my mental model is for how they do that effectively.
Thinking a little bit more about some of these themes we've talked about between alternative plan design and supporting these smaller plans, you had an interesting note on EXO in the newsletter. Can you talk a little bit about them as we go through some quick
Yeah.
headlines before our first guest?
EXO, really interesting startup model in that alternative plan design market for the employer space, generally speaking. As I am becoming increasingly convinced, I think it is the time feels right for these sorts of models in my mind as employers grapple with these kind of sustained high cost increases, need to find another option. There's a handful of startups that seem well positioned to win, if you will, in this market. So I thought it was interesting. EXO launched, I think, a few years ago, Atlanta, Dallas, Houston, Minneapolis, as this interesting value-based care provider network that if you go read some of the articles on their site, they talk about how they define episodes of care and tie value-based constructs around those episodes of care, which are closely tied to bundles, but they define episodes as differently than bundles in a slightly broader way. This gets into all the complexity of these sorts of models and how you administer them, and frankly, why I think it's been a challenge in the commercial market, because if your employer is thinking about how all of the complexity in managing this, it's just a lot, right? But it is interesting to see a company like EXO expanding nationally at this point in time, given those cost pressures, the dynamics that employers are facing. And I think it's a really good time if you are positioned to scale in that large group employer market. I think it's a good moment in time for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Another thing on our mind, or on my mind rather, was state waivers. So Nebraska applied for a state waiver for their Medicaid program. And so the typical way that Medicaid coverage works is if you're not enrolled in Medicaid, but you show up to the hospital and you're eligible for Medicaid, you can get retroactive coverage. The hospitals are big fans of this program because it's less uncompensated care for them. Medicaid is less of a fan of this because that is, in insurance parlance, that is like pure adverse selection. Like the if someone is showing up and enrolling because they need hospital services, then like that they're not a healthy patient that is smoothing out your risk pool. So Nebraska's asking to shorten their retroactive coverage to the beginning of the month when it's applied. Hospitals in Nebraska are very upset about this, as along with Medicaid advocates, and you can see why. It's a for folks who are on Medicaid, it's or eligible for Medicaid but don't know, and as that gets more complicated, it's going to be a tough time for them.
Do you know, is Nebraska seeking to move in line with more standard national standards in this regard, or are they seeking to be more aggressive with the waiver? Do you know?
Theirs is the most aggressive. There's 10 other states that have they've moved it back, and the One Big Beautiful Bill Act also moves it back. On that note, though, of sort of changes with the One Big Beautiful Bill, we are very excited to have Dr. Toyin Ajayi from Cityblock Health. I'm going to bring her on.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, Toyin.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm great. It's so good to see you both. How are you doing?
It's
Very
so great
good.
to see you. Thank you so much for making the time. You wrote an excellent report that came out last week on AI and Medicaid, and we had some questions and we kind of wanted to chat with you about it. And so
Love it.
Great. Kevin, over to you.
Yeah, Toyin, I thought it'd be fun to kick things off. You and I, both one-on-one, and then I've also seen you on panels over the years talking about this idea of trickle-down innovation, I'll call it, for lack of a better way of putting it. But the kind of general philosophy over the years that I'm going to build this cool new tool for the commercial population, and then it's going to start off high cost, and then it's going to become lower and lower cost over time, and it's going to benefit everybody, and it's going to be beautiful world we live in. That doesn't seem to have held true in healthcare historically. And it seems like one of the narratives I pick up in your writing on AI recently is we're at risk of that not playing out with AI, and we've got an opportunity to change the way we think about that. You've now written a couple articles kind of on this topical area, and I'd be curious the kind of why now behind the thrust of these articles, how you're thinking about the world between what our listeners are probably familiar with broadly in terms of cuts to Medicaid with One Big Beautiful Bill, but then also the transformational opportunity that a technology like AI provides. Can you walk us through kind of your lens on the world current state as it applies to AI, Medicaid populations, and the opportunity in front of us here?
Yeah, and thank you for the frame up, and really thanks for the opportunity. As you know, Kevin, for sure, I could talk about this forever, and so I'm so excited to get a chance to gem on it. Like, it's sort of, the macro is really profound, I think, at the moment, and it all plays into how we as people who have like a platform and an opportunity to act in any way, shape, or form in healthcare operate. And so when you sort of look at the big picture, we've got these like the HR1 is just but a small microcosm of the existential problem we face, which is that healthcare cost trends are 8 to 9% across every line of business, but particularly in government programs. And that is 2 times GDP growth and 2 times wage growth. Like, we cannot afford to pay for healthcare at the cost that it is requiring and demanding of us as a system. And everything else we talk about is sort of like has to come downstream of that. And so when you think about that, you think about the fact that it is the primary out-of-pocket expense for many families. It's the number one cause of personal bankruptcy for folks who are un or underinsured. It is an existential problem. Like, how do we solve our healthcare problem? we also are, in parallel talking about access gaps. We're talking about the dearth of primary care doctors, the lack of ability to care manage and care coordinate and make sense of this complicated healthcare system for so many millions of people who are trying to navigate it. And that is true in the commercial segment, it's true in Medicare, it's true in Medicaid. And so we've got these like big secular trends that we have to counteract. Enter this incredible, potentially transformational technology. And AI is like one of the most exciting things I think we are going to encounter in our lifetimes from a technology perspective. I'm fully convinced of it. The power is insane. Just think about, we went from ChatGPT, the big launch in 22 to what we can do today. It's changing like day by day, truly. But I think if you stand back and look about like what happens if we let things do what they're going to do, the sort of let the natural course of things drive how we leverage this technology. Here, like in everything that we encounter in our lives, in healthcare in particular, the incentives are going to drive the use cases. And we've seen exactly that, right? Like you've talked and written about this, I think so well, Kevin. Like we've just seen the use cases, like the low-hanging fruit is the stuff that is inflationary to healthcare costs, just to put it bluntly, right? Like we're seeing in healthcare more broadly, the use cases are driving revenue cycle. We're seeing, the AI talking to the other AI. On the one hand, folks are trying to get paid more for doing the same thing they did yesterday. On the other hand, folks are trying to limit that. We're not actually seeing widespread adoption yet of this technology in ways that expands access, improves experience, and reduces cost. And there is no reason why this technology should not be deflationary to healthcare costs. So that's a sort of fundamental premise. Like this should be not quite a panacea. There's no such thing. Healthcare is too complicated. But as close as we're going to get to a golden ticket, AI should be that, right? Like there's every reason to believe it could do that. It matters then who's wielding the technology and what incentives drive them. And what we see typically is innovation starts at the top, starts in the places where, frankly, folks are building for people like them, starts at the places that are less complicated, starts in the use cases where the profit pools are less onerous or larger, and folks tell themselves they're going to trickle down, and they hardly ever do, right? And so part of the sort of the hill I'm going to stand on and scream from and hopefully not die on is that we have this incredible opportunity. We've got, over the last decade, we've got incredible entrepreneurs and innovators who are really focused on Medicaid. That's a new thing. When we started our business, Medicaid wasn't really considered a particularly exciting or interesting place for venture-backed entrepreneurs to spend time. We've I think played a role, and I'm really grateful for that and humbled by it, and saying, actually, there's a thing here. When you have a market that serves like 1 in 4 children in this country, when you have a market that serves 75 million people, that is, underwritten by government taxpayer, that is fundamental to our very like existence as a society, frankly, in the way that we think about our safety net, like we should build there. But we've got to think about this technology in the same way. And we've got to think about intentionally building for these use cases as opposed to waiting and sitting back and hoping that things trickle down from elsewhere. And that's been our big thesis. And we just feel at Cityblock really fortunate to have the right incentives, the right tools, the right orientation. We've got this member population whom we're accountable for serving. And like, this is the perfect place to show how tremendous this technology can be and maybe buck the trend of some of the history of tech adoption in healthcare.
One thing that's been interesting to me about these conversations has been, okay, when you have a new technology, there's a sort of instinct to say, well, we don't want to use the marginalized populations, people on Medicaid, the safety net, as the test cases for those new technologies. And you and Andy wrote what I thought was a great piece on why that's maybe not the right frame for this technology. In your more recent piece, Medicaid plus AI, a new standard for innovation, you talked about kind of 6 principles for innovating. Can you walk us through your view or your theory of the case on this?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's a yes and, right? Like we should not use marginalized communities as, as guinea pigs. Totally aligned. We should do that responsibly. And to be fair, the critics of sort of, launching first with AI in Medicaid populations can draw on a ton of history. We've done it very badly in the past. So I totally get it. I'm fully empathetic to that point of view. The answer is not, therefore, absolutely not. And let's wait for tech to diffuse down. And mind you, remember in healthcare, the average just clinical or pharmaceutical innovation takes about a decade to trickle into like broad space clinical practice. We can't afford to wait that long. So the answer has to be, let's do it well with guardrails. And so we've taken a first stab, and I totally don't have a sort of, I don't think we have a moratorium on having gotten this right. Like, I would love a debate and discussion and the opportunity to refine this and communicate in community with others. But, you know, we think that there's a way to do this equitably and carefully. And so the first thing is we should start with equity. Like, let's think about how do we use tools to identify specifically the marginal use cases that we can then ensure that we protect against, right? Like, we know what some of the negative unintended consequences can be. We know how bias shows up in healthcare. We understand how that gets magnified. We have the tools to do that, to use those tools to make sure we're auditing and testing, to make sure that we're keeping people in and delivering care in an equitable way. And that's actually, the data helps us, if anything, right? Like, it helps us more than trying to do that in sort of historical, more analog models. I think the second thing is a core premise that I described earlier, which is like, I think we should solve the hardest and most challenging problems first. And again, the bar is low here in healthcare. And so it's crazy to me that folks would propose, given that we do not have enough clinicians willing to care for these populations today, willing and able, that we would withhold tools that may actually expand each doctor or provider's ability to take care of people, to serve them more and more effectively, and wait for, I don't know what, something else to happen. Like, we have no choice but to do this. And so start with easing what hurts now, giving people access to doctors, allowing doctors to spend more time with patients, making sure that when they get in front of them, they're more informed and better able to actually meet their needs and close the gap. Like, there are so many things that would demonstrably eliminate pain points immediately and engender trust in the system and allow us to earn the right to serve more folks. We think very much, and Cityblock has always sort of talked about trust and systems that are trustworthy. Increasingly, as we're talking about technology, we have to think not just about the individuals, but the systems, and make sure that they are trustworthy. How do we deepen the human relationship? How do we ensure that we're transparent about privacy and consent and explanations about how the data is being used? How do we take feedback from folks and ensure we're closing the loop? Like, that's a real opportunity we have here. And again, we know how to do this. We don't do it particularly well today in our more traditional healthcare systems, but we have an opportunity to do it differently. We think AI can really help stitch together fragmentation and become an engine for creating a relationship longitudinally amongst, again, our healthcare system today is fragmented. So surely we can use AI to ensure connectivity and context transposes across different environments. That seems, again, like a powerful use case. And let's think about it as an enabler of a relationship. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is engender behavior change. We're trying to get in front of people and earn the trust to have a conversation with them about what matters, to use that context to make recommendations that they may accept and utilize to change their behaviors. And that behavior might be, I'm going to call for help getting a refill of my, albuterol instead of going to the emergency room with an asthma attack. It may be, I'm going to take my diabetes medicines every day. It may be, I'm going to, follow up with my oncologist. Whatever those actions are that we need people to take, they are measured by behavior change and our ability to nudge and remind and counsel. These are all things that AI does incredibly well. And again, the studies have shown us in many instances, it does it better, more compassionately, more empathetically than humans who are constrained by time and by their own education and their biases. And ultimately, if we think about the technology as an ability to scale empathy and to scale the human touch, as opposed to replace it, I think we've got a really good framework that allows us to sort of adjudicate where and when we use this tech and make sure that we're using it in the right ways. So again, it's a starting point. Curious what people think, really open to push on it. But what we're hoping to do is to start a conversation about how we use the tech responsibly and effectively, as opposed to let's just put the kibosh on it and wait for, innovation to trickle down one day. We don't have time for that as a system. And we certainly at Cityblock believe that it's a sort of moral imperative for us, frankly, to be, given our position, given our incentives, given the technology we have, it's a moral imperative for us to use our position to advocate for and actually deploy innovations that are going to change outcomes for Medicaid members using this tech.
Toyin, I'd be curious, in your role as CEO, as I think about the principles and fast forward 5 or 10 years, and we're having another conversation about whether or not this did drive the positive change that it did, feels like if I play out the bear scenario, it is largely centered around profits over patients and things got sideways because there are clear financial incentives at play. It seems like the bull case is heavily reliant on individuals like you in leadership roles in organizations like this doing the right thing and prioritizing the right set of behaviors, looking at data in the right way, building that trust up, which can seem like a harder activity at times. How do you think about your role as CEO in an organization like Cityblock, trying to drive the organizational redesign within the workforce, within your infrastructure, to actually drive the positive change in the space and towards that outcome? Like, how does that show up on a day in, day out basis?
Yeah, and I think so. It starts within the context that we operate, because I think, you know, if we're relying on the sort of, for lack of a better term, the sort of the greater instincts of leaders in individual isolated settings to do the right hard thing, I think we're kind of in trouble. And you know, there are a few of us in a number of places that have the incentives, the structural incentives, to make this a business decision that makes sense, right? And I think that's, I mean, we've long been proponents, and you all have as well, of value-based or some sort of outcomes aligned business models. And like, they're made for this moment. So the first thing is like, I'm not making trade-offs here between, you know, am I doing the right thing for my shareholders and for the business and for the business imperatives, versus am I doing the right thing sort of in the frame of this moral imperative I described, or for our members and patients. They're actually the same. Like, we are incentivized as a company in order to win, because we deeply wish to win. And win for us means we have built a large, scalable, resilient, profitable business that serves Medicaid and dually eligible members with a higher quality of care, better access, better outcomes, and a lower cost base than anyone else out there. Like, that's what win means to us. And so you can see how leveraging AI throughout the business is actually aligned with our business imperatives. Like, if we do this well, we're not just incrementally improving OpEx by automating a few back office processes. We are radically rethinking the way that care is delivered and deployed, and the way that we use tools to scale our business in ways that put us ahead of the competition, for sure, and in ways that, frankly, like fee-for-service care delivery can't do. They don't have the incentives to do. Then you're asking people to make trade-offs between their bottom line and what's best for patients and communities and for the country and for the taxpayer. And I don't think that's going to work, frankly. Like, I think, humans operate, especially business people, successful business people, operate in alignment with their incentives. And so I think very much about how we leverage this moment for all of us who have the sort of the business alignment and the strategic alignment to do the hard thing, because the hard thing is going to pay off, and the hard thing becomes a model for the rest of the country as we continue to hopefully catalyze the shift away from let's just do the race to the bottom or top. I don't know, costs at the top, bottom in terms of innovation, in terms of other applications of this technology. Like, we just can't afford to have that happen. And so, I feel like so fortunate to be privileged enough to have the job I have in the moment I have in the company that I am, at a time when I think our country needs people like us to use our alignment, our resources, our tools to create pathways that we probably otherwise may not have the incentives to do.
Toyin, you've been so generous with your time. We don't want to keep you too late after it. Where can people find the report that you just wrote?
Awesome. It is, if you go to our website, cityblock.com, you can go check it out. And we're on LinkedIn. I'm trying to do better about being on social media. So if you have thoughts and feedback, you want to take us to task for getting something wrong, or you want to add to the conversation, we're really excited to continue to refine this, and hopefully to be part of a movement of folks who are trying to use these tools in ways that can really change outcomes. And I'm excited, hopefully, to have more and more to share. I think we're really committed to investing in this ecosystem, and so we'll continue to share what we do and what we learn as we go along. And really thank you guys for making the time.
We're excited to have you back in a little bit.
Thank
you.
You
can hear about some of the use cases. Really appreciate it.
Yep. Talk soon.
See you soon. Bye.
See ya.
That was great. It's very interesting to hear about this stuff and how it can work in safety net settings. I think one of the themes that I've been thinking about this year is the way that, if you can do it with dual eligibles, if you can do it in Medicaid populations, it means your business is operating incredibly well, and that can trickle up to the commercial markets as well.
For sure. It's going to be a fascinating space to watch evolve. Obviously, we are talking a lot these days about AI in clinical care. It's worth keeping an eye on for sure.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the Doctronic round a little bit later. Legion, who's focused on psychiatric medications, also announced a Utah refill pilot.
Yeah, that went under the radar last week. I didn't realize. Yeah. So they are similar pilot to what Doctronic's doing in Utah now, which seems like a big deal.
Focused on psychiatric medications. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. It's also cool to see Utah just like leading into this in a way that other states in the country are not.
Yep. If we have more time with Toyin in the future, one of the other topics I will be very curious to hear her take on is how this conversation is translating into regulatory type circles and what it implies for how the federal government are thinking about regulating AI. Because obviously there's been more pushback from on the payer side of the world using AI for denying care, et cetera. That, to Toyin's point, the trust conversation that comes up often, there seems to be a trust deficit with payers in the country today. And that seems like a major hurdle to the adoption in that market. But for clinical organizations that are, as Toyin talked about, mission aligned and also financially aligned, it seems like there's a lot of opportunity in there.
Absolutely. And the managed care model, the value-based care model, really, I think, lends itself to helping align some of those things. Up next, we have got Zach Kanter from Stedi joining us in just a minute. They raised a $50 million round. They have increased their number of paying customers by 6x year over year. A number of billed transactions have increased by 7x. The stat from the press release that I found amazing was that they are now processing more than 1 billion claims and eligibility transactions annually, which is more than they processed in more transactions in February alone than they did in the first half of 2025. Insane growth. And so to talk about what that growth means and the $50 million round, we've got Zach Kanter. I'm bringing him up. Hey, Zach.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Zach. Welcome to the show.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Here we are. Thanks for having me. Yeah. So I heard you shouting out the stats of the 6x customer growth year over year. And I think we don't know the exact stats, but I think one of those X's came from health tech nerds. The deal flow is fantastic. So we're hugely appreciative.
Glad to hear we're there for you guys.
Yes. So for folks who are less well versed in the sort of healthcare clearinghouse, transaction clearinghouse space, before the Change Healthcare cyber incident, I think most people hadn't heard of clearinghouses. After the Change Health, it sort of became a bigger part of the conversation. Can you give us the lay of the land and what sort of transactions are you processing? How has it changed in the intervening years with the post cyber incident?
Sure. So, the easiest way to think about a clearinghouse, they sit in between providers and payers. So obviously those are the two of the major players in the ecosystem. Providers could be, a digital health provider. It could be a large health system. It could be your local doctor or dentist, anything in between. And then the payers, of course, everyone thinks of the BUCA payers, Blue Cross Blue Shield, United, Cigna, but then there's a long tail of many thousands of payers. Fundamentally, it's not feasible for either one of those parties to connect with each other point to point. So you have millions of providers in the United States, you have thousands or tens of thousands of payers. And so maintaining those point to point connectivity would not be reasonable. So the clearinghouses sit in the middle, and they facilitate the exchange of what's generally known as administrative transactions. So, everybody knows of HIPAA. Most people think of that as a privacy framework. I have to go and sign HIPAA paperwork. I have to sign a BAA. One of the other things that it did was administrative simplification, which said that all the parties in the ecosystem, with some, narrow exceptions, have to use the exact same format for claims, eligibility checks, ERAs, a number of other transactions that flow back and forth. the standard that they chose was something called X12, which is the same standard that's used in retail and logistics, manufacturing, ocean freight, a whole bunch of other things. And as a result of that, basically everybody uses the same format, and the clearinghouses sit in the middle and do a few things. They provide the connectivity to the payers, and also for the provider side, the payers don't need to think about connecting to all the providers. They validate all of the transactions that come in and out to make sure that everything is compliant with the spec, and then they transmit the files, as needed. So, I think before the cyber attack that Change Healthcare had in February of 2024, many people, the clearinghouse might be a step removed from them. So you might use an EHR, and your EHR might use a clearinghouse under the hood. And before 2024, you might not have even known that a clearinghouse existed. You probably figured that your EHR is connected directly to the payers, but that is in almost all cases, that is not true. So when Change Healthcare got hit, all of a sudden everybody had to care about their clearinghouse, because the EHR said, okay, we can't transmit claims anymore. And they said, well, why not? And they explained why. So I think that it went from this invisible piece of technology in a similar way that probably most merchants might not care that Shopify uses Stripe under the hood. But the fact that Stripe is very reliable makes that possible. Once something happens, I think it changes the calculus quite a bit, and people start caring a lot more about what is happening.
Zach, I'd be curious, go-to-market strategy question. I see it, customer page on your website. Seems like a lot of digital health organizations, but across the spectrum of providers, payers, even some RCM type tools that are on the customer page on the site. Can you walk me through the journey of, I have this narrative in my head of digital health as initial wedge, go-to-market play, grow there, expand into kind of more traditional provider payer markets. But what's that journey been like over time? What's current state of customer base, and how do you see growth going forward after this round?
Yeah, I think what you see on our website is similar to many other folks, which is that there's a selection bias problem, in that the larger and more traditional the company, the less likely it is that they give you logo rights. And so, you kind of naturally see that as something that happens in health tech. You think about a clearinghouse as having 3 doors. So one way that someone could submit transactions to Stedi or any clearinghouse is via the user interface. So they come in, they log in, they submit a claim manually, they perform an eligibility check manually. Obviously, only your smallest providers are going to be doing that, and they have a high need for a nice polished UI, which we do offer. We are an API first clearinghouse, but that does not mean we're API only. So everything that you could do through the user interface or via the other methods is doable via API, but also we have user interface. The second method is for the traditional companies who are using those X12 EDI transactions, the HIPAA mandated transactions, and that means that they have probably an EHR RCM system that was built maybe 15 plus years ago, and they submit transactions via SFTP or via something called CAQH Core, SOAP, or MIME, which are the 2 kind of approved protocols for sending real-time transactions. And then the third door is API. And so when you think about the customers, where you see the logos on our website, most of those customers are using the third method, which is Stedi's bespoke API. We've created, a modern API that allows you to submit all the different transaction types and do a bunch of other things like ERA enrollments and create users and whatever else you might need to do via API. In terms of our customer mix, by quantity of customers, we have probably more health tech customers than we do anything else. And that's just because, you just can't imagine, well, you guys might be able to, but you can't imagine how many RCM, EHR, patient intake, front end, back end RCM startups are being created today. We see dozens and dozens and dozens of them every month. And so by the quantity, it is that, but we process more transactions by volume over the legacy methods, SFTP and CAQH Core, SOAP, than we do over API, and obviously a lot more than we do over user interface. So the majority of our business is in the traditional side.
You have this, I think, very unique view because of what you just talked about, and you're one of the more tech forward, maybe the most tech forward clearinghouse in the space. What impact are you seeing from AI, sort of broadly defined, both in your business and then on the industry generally?
Yeah, the first is the kind of Cambrian explosion of companies. I think that There's a few reasons for that. One is AI makes it easier to start a company. It's still really hard to start a company. I think the idea that, okay, like now, anyone can do it and you could just, kind of vibe code something that's going to work, I think is, you still have to get a product market fit. There's still a lot of things that you need to do. But I think the fact that you have, if you are coming from outside of healthcare, or maybe you're coming from the clinical side of healthcare and you want to do billing, it is much easier to ramp on things today. And that's a combination of, like, there's communities like Health Tech Nerds where you can learn about things and ask questions. You can ask Claude and ChatGPT. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to give you a lot of things about that. And so it's getting much easier to start companies. I think the health tech has been a particular beneficiary of that, because if you think about, like, why is it that the coding tools from a software coding tool, like, why is it that Claude Code and ChatGPT and Codex are taking off so much and Cursor taking off so much? So a couple things. One is that when you write code, there's a compiler. So compiler means that you can write a bunch of code, you can run it through the compiler and see, like, does it pass some basic checks to see is the code correct? It's not going to test all your business logic, but for that you can write test suites, and then you can ultimately, go run it through a pipeline and you can put it in production. And the fact that, like, the combination between the cost of getting things wrong is relatively low in code. So, you have a development environment, you can try some things. If it doesn't look right, you could try it again. And the fact that there's this big deterministic test suite that can be run for basically any language is what makes it such a rich space. And when you look at healthcare, it's the same thing. So we have the HIPAA standards, we have, NCCI edits, and you have NCD and LCD, and you have doctors' NPIs, and you have national drug codes, all the different things that can be checked. And so there's lots that can be checked deterministically. And then you can also submit something, and if you don't get it right, it's going to get rejected by the payer, and you can try again. And so the fact that there's this, like, rich ecosystem, this rich kind of substrate, means that it is ripe for automation. And because of that, you're seeing a lot more RCM startups being started than pick your other industry that has a lot less of that substrate. So I think because of that, we're just seeing a lot more of these companies being started. I think they're growing really quickly. We see customers come out of Y Combinator who are, building something in time for demo day, and then we see them sending a lot of transactions. So things are actually working. At the other end, we do see individual providers' offices now building their own software. Like, this is not happening. It's not thousands of providers, but we are seeing dozens of providers who are saying, yeah, we don't like the solution that we had, and we're using Cursor or Claude Code or Replit or whatever it is to build something ourselves.
You've got a very interesting data feed on the ramp of early staged RCM startups. I'm picking up on, which I didn't fully pick up on before. But
we should start a venture fund. Yeah.
Yes. I'd be curious to hear you talk through one of the things in your funding announcement you put on the site was talking about the clearinghouse landscape and how a lot of the other clearinghouse vendors are kind of these Frankenstein M&A bolted together plays over the decades. Can you? I'd be curious to give your narrative on the current state of that landscape and how Stedi continues to win over time. Like, is Stedi's goal with this funding round North Star being biggest, best clearinghouse in the space? Do you have broader ambitions than that? How do you articulate the path ahead?
Look, I think there's nothing inherently wrong with M&A. I think there's lots of great companies that have been built with M&A. I'll give you a counter example to that, which is you look at someone like Epic, where they said, okay, we're never going to acquire, we're never going to be acquired. And because of that, if you look at Epic's kind of cohesiveness of product versus the cohesiveness of product of the other companies in the space, like, is cited as one of the main reasons why they've dominated so much. And I think when you look at the existing clearinghouses who were all started before cloud computing, in many cases, they were started before the internet, or at least before the broad adoption of the internet. They grew through M&A over time, and they got to scale. They added a lot of connections. They added a lot of EHR integrations. They had a lot of providers, added a lot of payers. But the systems were never harmonized and rationalized. And so you end up with, you can buy a lot of SKUs from an existing clearinghouse, but they kind of are part of the same product in name only. So they have the same, they're sold on the same sales order, invoice, order form. They might be on the same domain at the top, but they're not natively integrated. And so when you ask, does my clearinghouse do appeals and denials? It's like, well, sort of. They bought a company 8 years ago that does appeals and denials, and like that's kind of sort of bolted onto the product, but it's not really, like what you think of as Stripe when you buy Stripe and then you get all these other features and functionality, or Rippling, one of these kind of multi-product companies that has a really nice cohesive set of things. We've taken that approach. So we've built everything ourselves. We've built our underlying EDI parsing and generation technologies. We've built our own infrastructure. We haven't bought any companies. We don't want to be purchased. I already bought and sold a company. Well, not bought and sold. I already sold a company and started a new one. And I don't think it is fun to sell companies. I don't think it's particularly fun to buy companies. I think it's fun to compound on one thing for a very, very long time. And when you build for the very long term, so I've been doing Stedi for 9.5 years. When you build for a very long term, it comes with a different mentality. First of all, you have to choose your investors very carefully. Do you also want to build for the long term? Are you optimizing for the short term? And then you're thinking through, okay, I'm building a house that I want to live in for a long time. This is not like something that I'm going to live in for the next 2 or 3 years. And so it changes the way that we make decisions. Because of that, in some cases, we probably have fewer features than some of the existing incumbents, but the features that we offer are much more reliable, much more scalable, much more performant, much better supported. And of course, over time, I think that Stedi, like this 3D printed product where we're laying down layer by layer by layer, the product is getting thicker and thicker. Over time, we're going to do all of the things that the other clearinghouses do and more, and our customers get the benefit of that continuous compounding just by continuing to use the platform.
This has been hugely helpful. Thanks so much for stopping by. If folks are interested in learning more about Stedi, where's the best place to find you on the internet?
They can find Stedi at stedi.com. We have a blog and changelog that produces a huge amount of valuable content. You can find me at Zach Kanter on Twitter, on LinkedIn as well. Probably is going to be the more relevant content as you scale. You notice that you post more on LinkedIn and less on Twitter. And of course, on Health Tech Nerds, you can always ask about Stedi. We're always thrilled to see other customers chime in there.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time today, Zach. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you, Zach. Funny on the story.
I find the clearinghouse space so fascinating. I used to work for a quasi clearinghouse, and what Zach is building is so fascinating to me because, number one, these big giant payers and EHRs hate working with startups. They have like no reason to do it and every reason not to. And number two, it's like the classic problem of building a network, which is if you build out all of your connections with the payers, you still only have half a business that no one will pay for. So I think it's just fascinating to watch companies like this.
For sure.
Yeah,
it's cool to hear that journey. I'm curious what a quasi clearinghouse is, but maybe we could have that conversation
another time. We have a lot of funding to get through, a lot of funding rounds to get through.
So 12 of them from last week.
Yeah, what a week. I want to start with Qualified Health. So we've met these guys, super nice. They raised $125 million, which is a lot. NEA led the round. They had a bunch of strategics on there. How do you think about Qualified Health? How would you describe to Qualified Health to someone who was maybe not following their story as closely?
I think of it as a organization that is helping health systems deploy and manage AI at scale, right? If you're a health system, I sat inside of a health system prior to starting Health Tech Nerds, writing the newsletter. You've got a lot you are managing on a day in, day out basis. A new technology comes along like AI, and you either have a decision to build out team internally to manage the deployment of AI safely, uniformly across the organization, or you look to a best-in-class partner to do the deployment and partner with you. And Qualified seems like it is saying, hey, we're going to be the partner, particularly if you don't want Palantir, who also seems happy to be the partner, but is perhaps running into some issues with the current political landscape. We just covered New York Health and Hospitals is terming a contract at the end of contract, I think, coming up this fall because of concerns for Palantir's political affiliations and the work they're doing there. And it makes a lot of sense that that health systems have this need, are looking for this partner. And are going to, in the next year or two, align themselves to an org that can help them deploy these capabilities. I liken it to when I was at Alina, we partner with Health Catalyst from a data analytics perspective. We Health Catalyst took some Alina employees under the Health Catalyst umbrella and then provided services back to Alina. To me, it's kind of a similar mental model. Now, if I'm qualified, I'm very much saying we are Palantir-like. We are not Health Catalyst-like, which last time I checked this morning was like $90 million of market cap, which is an unfortunate current place to be for that organization, because they do have also a number of health system customers that they're providing these services to. So to me, it's somewhere in between those narratives, with the general thesis being we're going to help health systems adopt AI, which is a cool place to be.
Yeah, you'd much rather have Palantir's valuation than Healthcare Catalyst.
Yeah, I don't even know what it is, but I'm sure it's not $90 million.
It was, well, yeah, it was like a 3-digit forward revenue PE. So,
Yep.
Okay. Next, Thesis Care, a startup building AI agents for clinicians, raised a $45 million round. Oak HCFT led the round. This is the startup formerly known as Trovo, and this is an exciting space right now. This is like, we're building agents for clinicians, we're building agents for front office, mid office, back office, a lot of activity. The anchor tenant here is US Heart and Vascular for Thesis. And so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. It just feels like every week there's one or two of these folks who are announcing around, and it'll be interesting to see where it shakes out.
Yeah, to me, most interesting parts of this, Oak HCFT leading the round. They are well-known investor in healthcare, so seeing them place a bet on this business seems notable. Names like US Heart and Vascular seem to indicate where this business is playing and going to specialty clinics and supporting those. All of it seems pretty logical. It's going to be, we're going to have to watch the space evolve over time, but pretty clearly there are going to be some winners. You combine that qualified thesis with what Toyin was talking about implementing AI and Cityblock, and you can see kind of all the various questions that I'm sure US Heart and Vascular like leaders are asking themselves at this point of like, do we partner? Do we build? How do we think about these capabilities? Are we going to like go compete with Google for best in class AI talent? I don't know. So it'll be interesting to watch.
We talked about this a little bit before, but when we were talking about AI clinical care, but Doctronic raised a $40 million round.
Yes, Doctronic has been in the news a lot, obviously, right? They had the MindGuard red teaming AI, which, as we noted, was on their public-facing version of the world, not kind of their V2 that's in Utah that has stirred up a lot of conversation recently. There's also a really interesting article on Endpoints this week that it highlights a user experience going through Doctronic. Somebody was looking for a referral to physical therapist, and the experience didn't seem all that great, right? To me, it highlighted the gap between kind of the proposed future state of what all this might look like and current reality of these tools, which is that they're going to struggle in some instances, right? And we are still very much in the first, second innings of the Doctronics of the theses rolling out, and yet to see who wins. That said, Doctronic did share some interesting uptake data. They're seeing 300,000 plus weekly visitors. They're noting they're seeing a pickup in repeat visitors, which that kind of churn question will be interesting to keep an eye on for companies in the space over time. They also suggested they are doing roughly 20,000 telehealth consults per month, which is just the math we're backing into based off. They said they're hitting 8 figures of annual revenue. They're charging $30 a month or $40 per telehealth visit. That seems to be that number. So interesting traction for them. I'll be curious to watch kind of how Doctronic V2 rolls out, while also seeing what happens in the state of Utah in particular, right?
It was not Doctronic, but did you ever get off the wait list for that other AI doctor?
I should open up the app. I've never heard. What was that company's name?
Adonis, an AI-centric revenue cycle management company, raised $40 million. If you thought that it was the end of the AI rev cycle management boom, you are sadly mistaken.
Yes, AI rev cycle is, as we were talking about with Zach. I would be curious on the exhaust data that he is seeing in Stedi on who is winning. Adonis getting 40 million bucks seems like good traction for them. They saw 4x revenue growth in 2025. Mount Sinai quoted as a customer. All seem like reasonable data points. Hard to tell though. I don't know how to tell these RCM plays apart beyond, okay, Mount Sinai is a cool customer name for them,
Yeah.
So,
okay, I have a pitch for you. Tom Brady, wellness officer, Linda Yaccarino, former CEO of the app formerly known as Twitter, now X, and GLP-1s. Based on that, ballpark valuation for me.
well, I already know the answer to this. I'll go high. We'll just say $2 billion and do the actual valuation.
That seems
It's crazy.
That seems correct. So Aon Consulting led the round, not a company I was aware did much venture investing, but good to know.
Yeah, we talk like, conflicts of interest in business. I would be curious to know how Aon firewalls something like this when they're going to employers, whatnot, and having conversations around here's what market for GLP-1 looks like. I don't know how that works, but such is the way things go. I find it fascinating. Back to this valuation point, you've got eMed, very early days, $2+ billion valuation. You've got Omada, public company that is what, $800 million right now at the moment.
Yeah.
You've got Verta out there, which is doing really meaningful stuff in the space.
GoodRx going after employers.
Yeah,
$700 million valuation.
It seems like such a sign of the times of where interest is at the moment, both in GLP-1s and also peptides more generally. That seems like a key part of the narrative here. eMed is going after both employer market and direct consumer market, obviously. So we can be setting up the infrastructure for these for peptide craze coming to market to a market near you soon. I don't know what to make of it. I'm sure there's an opportunity to make money here. Tom Brady has had a hit or miss involvement, I think, in things over time. His crypto involvement was not particularly smooth.
Well, Kevin, if they hadn't liquidated FTX and those Anthropic shares would have, I think, bailed him out. But I think the
Yes.
bankruptcy administrator just didn't hold, and that's on them.
What a jerk.
Blossom Health, AI co-pilot for psychiatry practices, raised a $20 million round. This is cool to see. I think there's been some conversations about independent psychiatric care, and they have hundreds of clinicians, 10,000 plus patients, working on bringing AI to psychiatry. This one caught my eye, Kevin. Clasp. What does Clasp do?
So they seem to be helping health systems. They cite Memorial Sloan Kettering, Northwestern, Novant, Ohio, Boston Children's, help retain their clinical new hires at a higher rate by playing with loan deferrals and paying off more of your loan the longer they keep you. They cite that they're seeing retention rates at 2.x higher than other new hires, which struck me as really interesting. Like I hadn't fully thought this space through before, but I was like, I can see why health systems would be like, yeah, I want this. Now I'm curious what the employee implications are, right? Like, if you're getting paid to defer things out, how does that feel as new hire? I don't know. Does that lower acceptance rates as a result? I'm just riffing off the cuff here now. I don't know. But fascinating model nonetheless.
Dimer Health, an AI-centric post-discharge platform, raised $13.5 million. Prax Health, which is a business-in-a-box NP model, announced $10 million in funding across 2 rounds. I wrote up a little bit about this and the physician shortage. If you would like to go get into an argument about NPs and physicians, you can go check my LinkedIn mentions.
I don't get that argument, but we'll keep moving for now.
We got to keep moving.
That's
here.
Another conversation. Yes.
Certuma, a startup building an AI doctor, a $60 million valuation. Holy smokes. And then lastly, Vital, which is really on trend for right now. Connects compounding pharmacies with longevity clinics.
The fact that that business is generating 10 million plus of ARR at the moment is like another data point. Longevity clinics, what's happening in that space, compounded pharmacies. There's going to be a lot of money made here in the coming years.
That brings us a little bit past the top of the hour. Kevin, always a pleasure catching up. We will see you all next week, same time, same place. And in the intervening days, we are probably going to get an MA final notice. So
let's go.
Let's go. All right. Have a great day, everyone.
All right. See you, Martin. Bye.